David walked into the bank slowly, hoodie pulled up and a simple backpack on his back, but his eyes sharp, like he wasn't just any client. He was there for a reason only he knew, and the tension in the air seemed to scream that something was about to happen. The butterflies in his stomach mixed with a hint of excitement. Something was at stake that nobody could imagine. As he looked around, he noticed the marble shining, lights reflecting on the floor, and the clients rushing by. But he didn't feel rushed. He felt in control. It was a strange feeling, invisible in his own world, yet carrying a huge secret, and he knew the manager would appear soon. David just had to wait for the right moment to turn everything upside down. He took a deep breath, adjusted the collar of his simple t-shirt, and took that step that looked ordinary but had weight behind it. Every movement was measured but natural, like he both belonged there and didn't. He passed the first few clients without anyone noticing, and that gave him a small smile, the kind of smile that says, "You have no idea who I am." Still, a little anxiety pressed at his chest. This first encounter could change everything. He felt the energy of the place, the arrogance of some clients mixing with the nervousness of the tellers. David knew every second inside that bank counted. He glanced at his watch, pretending casualness, and noticed the manager heading his way. The guy had that "I own the world" posture, chest out, quick short steps, and a smile that practically shouted, "I'm about to judge you now." David shivered with anticipation, but kept his gaze calm, almost nonchalant. His fingers played with the strap of his backpack, silently saying, "I'm relaxed," while his mind stayed alert, calculating every reaction of the other. The tension in the air grew, and even without a word, the manager was already judging what he saw, and he was about to discover he was very wrong. David noticed small details around him, clients checking their phones, tellers exchanging discreet glances, coins clinking at the counter. Everything felt like a stage, and he knew his moment to shine was coming. He breathed out slowly, like preparing to dive into cold water. Every muscle in his body was relaxed but alert, ready for any surprise. His heart beat in a rhythm, mixing patience and anticipation, and in that instant, David realized the entire bank was a game of appearances, and he held all the cards. While waiting, he adjusted his backpack almost imperceptibly, letting slip an expensive detail that few would notice, but that showed he was more than just another client. His eyes scanned the hall, taking in every gesture, every expression of those around him, as if mentally noting every movement. Deep down, he knew nobody suspected the truth. The sense of silent power mixed with tension made him smile faintly, almost unnoticed. But inside, a spark of impatience started to rise. The moment of the big reveal was approaching. David's posture was natural, yet it conveyed something different. Confidence without arrogance, attention without fear, presence without show. He noticed a few curious glances toward him, but nothing compared to what was about to come. Every step the manager took toward him increased the weight in the air, and he felt the first hint of anticipatory fun, the kind of fun only someone in complete control of the game can feel. He took another deep breath, preparing the ground for the showdown that would change everything. He quickly thought about what he would say, the gestures he would make, the impact he wanted to create. Every detail was stored in his mind. The tone of his voice, the right moment for a smile, the look that would make the manager hesitate. And yet he maintained naturalness, as if nothing was planned, as if it were just another ordinary day. But David knew this day would be anything but ordinary. Something was about to explode, and he was the detonator. Finally, the manager stopped a few meters away, wearing that familiar air of superiority, ready to assess what was in front of him. David stepped forward calmly, feeling adrenaline pulse silently. A curious silence hung between them, as if the world had slowed down for a few seconds. And in that moment, David realized the game was about to start, and he held all the cards. Little did the manager know he was about to lose badly, and fast. The manager spotted David the moment he stepped in. He had that look of someone who's used to judging everyone around, chest out, chin slightly raised, and a smile that almost dared anyone to challenge him. Just another client, he thought, eyes scanning from head to toe, noting the hoodie, the simple backpack, the casual sneakers. There was a subtle twitch of amusement in his face, like he had already written David off. He leaned slightly forward, hands resting on the counter, and spoke with a tone dripping with condescension. "Can I help you with something complicated, or is this just a quick visit?" His words were meant to put David in his place, to make him feel small, but David only gave a faint smile and met his gaze calmly. The manager did not notice the steadiness in David's eyes, a calm that contrasted sharply with his own exaggerated posture. David's presence seemed almost ordinary, yet the manager couldn't shake a feeling that something was off. Maybe it was the calmness, the subtle confidence, or the way he carried himself. Every movement was natural, measured, and confident. The manager tried to mask it with a chuckle, leaning back slightly, but inside he was already slightly irritated. He wasn't used to being faced with someone who didn't crumble under his scrutiny. As David approached the counter, the manager made small gestures, brushing imaginary dust from his suit, adjusting his tie, anything to remind himself who was in charge. But David didn't flinch, didn't hesitate, and didn't give a hint of intimidation. That subtle defiance, wrapped in politeness, started to shift the balance. The manager frowned, unsure why he was no longer feeling fully in control. Other clients were barely noticing the interaction, yet David's quiet confidence seemed to radiate, creating small waves of curiosity. The manager's condescending tone grew sharper, trying to compensate for the unease creeping into his composure. "You'll need to be precise with the details," he said, voice slightly louder than necessary, hands moving as if orchestrating the scene. David nodded politely, keeping a calm smile, and answered with clarity. Each word was deliberate, each gesture thoughtful yet seemingly effortless. The manager's amusement was fading, replaced by a faint tension he couldn't explain. The confidence David exuded, though quiet, was quietly challenging the manager's authority, and he didn't like it. By now, a subtle energy had shifted around the counter. The manager tried a few more exaggerated gestures, pointing, adjusting his stance, speaking louder, but each attempt only highlighted the growing gap between them. David remained composed, eyes steady, giving nothing away but leaving the manager increasingly unsettled. At the end of this first impression, the manager forced a smile, trying to reclaim his authority, but it was thin and shaky. He realized, even if he wouldn't admit it, that David wasn't an ordinary client, and somewhere deep down, he sensed that this encounter was about to become far more interesting and much more humbling than he could have anticipated. David leaned slightly on the counter, keeping his expression calm and composed, as if he was just another client. But the request he was about to make wasn't ordinary. It required attention, precision, and a level of professionalism the manager wasn't expecting. "I need to set up a special transfer," he said casually, his tone smooth, almost nonchalant, but precise enough to hint that this wasn't a routine transaction. The manager's eyes narrowed slightly, trying to assess the situation. He had seen plenty of special requests, but something about David's calm delivery and focused gaze made him hesitate for a moment. He tried to mask it with a half-smile, leaning back slightly. "Oh? And what kind of transfer are we talking about?" he asked, his voice laced with that familiar condescension. David pulled out a form from his backpack, filling in details with deliberate care. Each line he wrote seemed simple, almost casual, but the numbers and instructions were far from ordinary. The manager leaned closer, trying to catch any mistake, any sign of incompetence he could mock. But David moved with confidence, as if he had done this 100 times, and maybe he had, in ways the manager couldn't imagine. While the manager tried to assert control, David's calm demeanor remained unshaken. He spoke clearly, answering questions with patience, giving precise information, but never over-explaining. The tone was polite, the wording natural, yet it carried a subtle authority that made the manager flinch without knowing why. Each step highlighted the contrast between the young client's competence and the manager's assumed superiority. Other clients glanced over curiously, sensing the unusual nature of the exchange. David didn't mind. He didn't need an audience. But the energy in the room shifted subtly, as if the presence of someone competent and unflustered could ripple through the crowd without a word. The manager's attempts at control were becoming forced, awkward, and slightly desperate. David's gaze was steady, never wavering, as he handed over documents and clarified instructions. The transfer he was requesting wasn't flashy, but precise, something that required exacting attention. The manager realized he couldn't underestimate this client without risk. Every misstep in judgment so far had started to make him uneasy. The young man kept his movements smooth and intentional, yet nothing seemed rehearsed. There was no show, no exaggeration, just calm confidence and quiet control. The manager noticed involuntarily that this client wasn't just competent. He was aware, calculating, and subtly commanding. Each moment reinforced the growing tension, a silent game unfolding between them. By the end of this interaction, it was clear. David wasn't just another client making a special request. There was a calm authority about him that unsettled the manager. The request itself had become secondary. The real test was in the way David carried himself, confident and unshakable, leaving the manager to feel the first cracks of his own arrogance. The manager's lips curled into a smirk, trying to mask the flicker of doubt that David's calm had sparked. He leaned forward, tapping a pen against the counter like he was the one in charge of the entire room. "You really think you know what you're doing?" he asked, voice dripping with sarcasm. His eyes scanned David's every move, looking for a hint of incompetence, anything to justify the superiority he felt entitled to. David didn't flinch. He met the manager's gaze evenly, a faint knowing smile tugging at the corner of his lips. Nothing about him screamed fear or hesitation. The manager's smirk faltered for a brief moment, but he quickly tried to recover, laughing lightly, an exaggerated laugh that didn't reach his eyes. David, calm and collected, simply continued, letting the manager reveal more of himself with every word. "Perhaps we should go step by step," the manager said, forcing patience into his tone. He gestured to the forms, clearly trying to reassert dominance. But every gesture felt clumsy, almost theatrical, as if he were performing for an audience he wasn't aware of. David's calm presence made the manager increasingly aware of how little control he actually had over the situation. David spoke with clarity, answering each pointed question without hesitation, yet without sounding defensive. Every answer was precise, intentional, and carried a subtle authority. The manager tried to laugh again, shaking his head, attempting to brush off the unease he felt creeping into his chest, but inside he knew he had misjudged the young client. Other clients and staff began noticing the unusual tension. A few exchanged glances, whispering softly among themselves. The manager's attempts at humor and sarcasm now seemed forced, awkward, and slightly desperate. David's quiet confidence highlighted every flaw in the manager's performance, and the young man didn't even need to speak louder. His mere presence was enough. David moved slightly, adjusting the form with smooth, precise movements. The manager, watching, felt the first real pang of uncertainty. He was used to controlling interactions, used to clients faltering under his scrutiny, but here, everything he did only emphasized how composed and capable David was. It was subtle, but painfully effective. The manager tried to assert himself one last time, leaning in with exaggerated authority, voice sharp. "Are you sure you understand how this works?" he asked, hoping for a mistake. David only smiled softly, calmly responding with enough knowledge to leave the manager reeling. Every word, every gesture reinforced the unspoken reality. The manager's arrogance was crumbling. By the end of this block, the room's energy had shifted. The manager, still trying to maintain a facade of control, felt the first cracks of his arrogance widening. David remained composed, calm and steady, silently commanding the room. The young man hadn't raised his voice, hadn't been aggressive, yet he had taken the first clear step in turning the tables. The stage was set for the next move, and the manager was already on the defensive. As the manager tried to regain control, David's calm presence began to ripple through the room. Other clients started noticing the unusual dynamic, subtle expressions of curiosity appearing on their faces. Some leaned slightly forward, trying to catch what was happening, while others exchanged quiet whispers, sensing that this wasn't just another routine transaction. David remained polite and composed, answering questions clearly, but the confidence he radiated drew attention. A few clients glanced at each other, raising eyebrows as if to say, "This kid, there's something about him." Even without realizing it, David had become the center of attention. The manager's forced arrogance now contrasted sharply with the quiet authority of the young man. One client accidentally dropped a pen, and David bent slightly to hand it back with a small smile. It was a casual gesture, yet it carried grace and composure, subtly reinforcing his presence. The client's eyes lingered for a moment, impressed by the ease and elegance in his movements. The atmosphere in the bank shifted, and even the staff began to sense the tension rising. David noticed the side glances, the hushed conversations, and let them happen. He didn't need to assert himself with words. His composure and the manager's obvious discomfort spoke louder than any statement. The bank was watching a quiet showdown, and David was in full control, letting others feel the suspense without forcing it. The manager, realizing he was now on display, tried to redirect attention back to himself. He gestured more, smiled awkwardly at nearby clients, and spoke louder than necessary, attempting to mask his insecurity. But each move only highlighted the disparity. David's calm authority against the manager's faltering performance. A few clients subtly shifted their positions, leaning closer to see the interaction more clearly. Their curiosity wasn't just about the transaction anymore. It was about the exchange of power unfolding in front of them. David, aware of every look and reaction, maintained his composure, letting the unspoken tension grow naturally. Even the tellers and staff were now fully attentive, exchanging discreet glances and raising silent questions. Who was this young man? Why was the manager suddenly so unsettled? Every small detail David revealed through calm words, precise movements, and composed gestures added to the intrigue. He had become the focal point of everyone's attention without even trying. By the end of this block, the manager's earlier confidence had dissipated further, while David's subtle influence over the room had grown. The client's curiosity and quiet fascination added pressure to the already tense situation. The stage was perfectly set for the next phase. David's ability to maintain calm under scrutiny was about to turn the tables completely. Despite the manager's increasingly forced gestures and raised voice, David remained composed, almost serene. His posture was relaxed, his movements deliberate yet effortless. Inside, his mind raced, calculating every angle, anticipating the manager's reactions, but on the surface, he appeared completely unshaken. It was a calm that seemed to radiate, drawing the attention of everyone around. He answered every question with clarity and poise, never rushing, never over-explaining. The manager, trying harder to intimidate, only made the contrast more obvious. David's calmness was like a mirror, reflecting the manager's insecurity back at him. Every word, every small gesture showed that he was in full control of himself, and by extension the situation. David's eyes scanned the room occasionally, catching subtle reactions from staff and clients. Some leaned forward, whispering to each other. Others simply watched quietly. He didn't mind. In fact, he welcomed the attention. It was part of the silent power he carried, letting others notice the difference without saying a single aggressive word. The manager shifted uncomfortably, trying to regain control through volume and sarcasm. But David didn't flinch. A soft smile played on his lips, almost imperceptible, a silent signal that he knew exactly what was happening. He breathed slowly, in and out, as if savoring the tension in the air, letting the manager feel the pressure without any overt action. Even when the manager tried to interject with sharp questions or impatient gestures, David responded calmly, thoughtfully, never defensive, never flustered. It was the kind of composure that unnerved those who relied on intimidation and sarcasm to assert dominance. David didn't need to raise his voice. His calmness was louder than any outburst the manager could muster. Small details amplified his effect. The way he adjusted his backpack slightly, the precise movement of his hands over the forms, the steady gaze he held. Nothing was excessive, nothing theatrical, yet everything conveyed authority. The room was subtly aware that this young man was not to be underestimated. Each passing moment tested the manager further. Every attempt at mockery, sarcasm, or overemphasis only highlighted the young client's calm dominance. David stayed perfectly composed, the storm inside him contained, letting the manager unravel quietly. The contrast between the two had never been clearer. By the end of this block, the manager's frustration was palpable, while David's silent command of the room had strengthened. His calmness wasn't just a personal shield. It was a tool that shifted the energy around him, preparing the scene for the subtle yet powerful revelations to come. The tension was thick, and David was ready to play his next card. David Miller, 27 years old, a young man with light brown skin, dark brown, slightly wavy hair that's well kept, an athletic build, and a confident gaze. He wears a simple grey t-shirt, dark jeans, and a black long-sleeve hoodie with a hood, paired with a subtle pair of sneakers, a modest look, but with natural elegance. Mr. Howard, 48 years old, manager with fair skin, greying blonde hair slicked back with gel, slightly overweight, and an arrogant expression. He wears a spotless navy blue suit, a white shirt, and a red tie, exuding a forced sense of authority and vanity. Mrs. Collins, 35 years old, a cashier with fair skin, red hair tied in a practical bun, looking tired but kind. She wears the bank's uniform in shades of blue and white, maintaining an attentive and empathetic expression throughout the conflict. Mr. Parker, 60 years old, an older customer with pale skin, fully grey hair and a curious look. He wears a beige suit and round glasses, observing everything with discretion and interest, as if recognizing something important is unfolding. Manager's assistant, 26 years old, a young person with medium brown skin, straight black hair styled to the side, a rigid and nervous posture. He wears a white shirt and dress pants, trying to imitate the boss, but lacking the same confidence. As David continued his calm interaction, small details began to emerge that hinted he wasn't just any ordinary client. A sleek watch peeked from under his sleeve, understated but undeniably expensive. A subtle logo on his backpack strap, nearly invisible, spoke of quality without boasting. Nothing flashy, nothing loud, just quiet hints that commanded attention for those who noticed. He adjusted his posture slightly, revealing the edge of a finely tailored jacket beneath the hoodie, a silent nod to sophistication and status. Each movement was natural, but deliberate, like someone who had been taught to carry presence without needing to announce it. Even the way he held his pen, or the careful way he arranged his documents, spoke of familiarity with precision and detail. Clients nearby began to catch glimpses of these small hints. A curious glance at the watch, a subtle raise of an eyebrow at the backpack. They didn't yet know the full story, but their subconscious started noticing. David's quiet confidence, paired with these subtle markers, made the manager's attempts at control seem even more clumsy. David didn't draw attention to himself. He simply existed with quiet elegance. His calm composure and the understated luxury of his accessories contrasted sharply with the manager's forced gestures and exaggerated arrogance. Each small detail seemed to reinforce a silent narrative. This young man was far more capable than anyone in the room had guessed. He shifted a fraction, revealing just a glimpse of polished shoes beneath casual pants. Nothing ostentatious, but enough for anyone paying attention to notice the quality. These small, deliberate signs weren't just about wealth. They were about awareness, presence, and subtle dominance. The manager's confidence wavered with each unnoticed clue. David's eyes caught the reactions of nearby staff and clients. Small looks of intrigue, quiet whispers, and barely there smiles told him that people were starting to sense the truth, that he wasn't ordinary. The energy in the room began to shift, with subtle tension growing as the manager's superiority started to crack under the weight of unspoken realization. Even while handling the forms and answering questions, David allowed small, almost imperceptible hints of his status to show. The smooth handling of documents, the easy command of financial terms, the effortless confidence in his posture, all quietly screamed competence and power. Every detail added to the manager's growing unease. By the end of this block, the scene was set perfectly. The manager's arrogance was being chipped away by subtle, almost invisible cues, while David's calm, understated wealth created a quiet authority that filled the room. The stage was ready for the confrontation to reach its climax, with tension and curiosity hanging thick in the air. The tension between David and the manager reached its peak. Every subtle gesture, every quiet word had built an invisible battlefield of control. The manager, chest puffed out, tried one last display of authority, raising his voice just enough to command attention. "Are you absolutely sure you understand the process?" he asked, tone dripping with sarcasm. David's response was calm, deliberate, and unshakable. He didn't need to raise his voice or exaggerate his movements. "Yes," he said simply, voice steady, eyes meeting the manager's with quiet certainty. That single word, calm and confident, seemed to make the room hold its breath. The manager felt an unexpected shift. The power he thought he had was slipping through his fingers. The manager tried to mask it with a chuckle, leaning back as if he was still in control. But every client and staff member in the room could sense the falter in his confidence. His gestures became sharper, almost frantic, a desperate attempt to reassert dominance. Meanwhile, David's calm composure contrasted perfectly, each movement smooth, deliberate, and unassuming. David leaned slightly forward over the counter, not in aggression, but in quiet authority. His eyes scanned the forms, then lifted to the manager, giving a faint smile that spoke volumes. The manager's arrogance wavered, and for the first time, he was truly aware that he might be outmatched. Every calculated word and action from David hit with subtle precision, revealing the cracks in the manager's bravado. A few clients exchanged glances, sensing the invisible tension. Whispers of curiosity mixed with admiration. Some even held their breath, waiting for what would happen next. David's calm energy radiated outward, and the manager's voice, now slightly unsteady, betrayed him more than any words ever could. The room felt like a silent theater of anticipation. David adjusted his backpack just enough to reveal another subtle clue of refinement. Not to boast, but to silently signal capability. The manager's eyes caught it, a flash of realization crossing his face. The room seemed to contract around them, the unspoken knowledge of David's true competence hanging heavily in the air. Every second made the manager more aware of how far he had misjudged the young client. Then, in that perfect moment, David spoke with calm authority, gently but clearly correcting a minor mistake in the paperwork. The manager's jaw tightened, and he could feel the room's focus shifting. a quiet energy moving from him to David. His smugness, once so loud, now seemed fragile, forced, and fading fast. By the end of this block, the confrontation had reached its peak. The manager was visibly rattled, struggling to maintain a facade of control, while David's composed dominance filled the space. The climax had arrived, subtle, tense, and perfect, setting the stage for the reveal that would leave everyone, including the manager, completely stunned. David leaned back slightly, letting a calm silence fill the air. Every eye in the bank was now on him, and the manager's forced confidence had completely faded. David's faint smile held a quiet secret, the kind that could change the room in an instant. He let the moment stretch, letting curiosity and tension build, before speaking in a steady, confident voice. "I think it's time you knew the truth," David said, eyes locking with the manager's. The manager blinked, confused, unsure if he was about to hear a joke or a serious statement. David reached into his backpack and pulled out a small card, not flashy, but unmistakably official. He handed it to the manager with a calm, almost playful smile. The manager took it hesitantly, scanning it quickly. His expression froze as recognition hit. The card revealed what everyone had suspected but could hardly believe. David was not just any client. He was the true owner of the bank, or at least the son of the billionaire behind it. A stunned silence rippled through the room. David's eyes never left the manager's. There was no need for shouting or dramatic gestures. The revelation alone carried the weight. The manager's mouth opened slightly, as if to speak, but no words came. His arrogance, once so loud and commanding, had evaporated instantly. Every client and staff member felt the shift as the quiet authority of David became undeniable. Some clients gasped softly, others leaned in, captivated. Staff members exchanged glances, some wide-eyed, all absorbing the sudden reversal. David's calm demeanor now radiated dominance in a way that was impossible to ignore. The power dynamic had shifted entirely, and the manager was left exposed, humbled by the truth. David gave a small nod, not condescending, just confident. "I wanted to see how things were handled," he added casually, "and I think we learned a lot today." The manager, still processing, could only manage a stiff nod in response, realizing the lesson had been taught without a word of aggression or insult. The subtle luxury details, the watch, the backpack, the careful movements, suddenly made sense to everyone. David had never needed to boast. The hints were enough for those paying attention, and the revelation tied everything together perfectly. The quiet authority that had been simmering throughout the encounter was now fully visible. By the end of this block, the manager was left speechless. Clients were amazed, and staff were in awe. The revelation had done its work. Arrogance had been replaced by respect. Curiosity had become admiration, and David's composed strategy had completely overturned the situation. The stage was now set for the manager's reaction and the elegant resolution to follow. The manager's face drained of color, and for the first time, the confident mask he wore slipped completely. His jaw tightened, eyes widening as the full weight of the revelation hit him. The smugness that had carried him through the morning vanished, replaced by a mixture of shock, embarrassment, and disbelief. Every client and staff member in the bank sensed the shift immediately. He tried to speak, but the words caught in his throat. I didn't realize," he stammered, voice shaky. It was the kind of moment he'd never anticipated in all his years of authority. He had underestimated someone based on appearances, and the consequence was humiliation that played out in front of everyone. David, still calm and collected, watched silently. He didn't need to gloat or mock. The manager's reaction was already the perfect demonstration of his misjudgment. Every flustered gesture, every awkward attempt to regain composure only reinforced David's quiet dominance. The room seemed to lean in collectively, absorbing the full drama of the reversal. Clients exchanged glances, some smiling faintly, others whispering quietly. Staff members stared, wide-eyed, taking in the transformation of the situation. The manager, once the center of attention and authority, now seemed small, his arrogance dissipated in an instant. The lesson was unfolding naturally, without confrontation, just the revelation of truth. The manager straightened slightly, attempting to recover dignity, but it was forced. He tried a polite smile, a small nod, anything to salvage some sense of control, yet it was clear he was humbled. His voice remained quiet, apologetic even, a stark contrast to the earlier confidence that had filled the room. David, sensing the shift, didn't rush the interaction. He allowed the manager a moment to absorb the impact fully. There was a silent understanding. No one had to shout. No one had to point fingers. The truth alone had undone the arrogance that had seemed so secure just moments ago. Every glance from David carried calm assurance, reinforcing his position without a word of aggression. The clients and staff were witnesses to the elegant reversal, seeing clearly how composure, patience, and subtle authority could outweigh arrogance and judgment. The manager's internal struggle became a quiet spectacle, more powerful than any confrontation could have been. By the end of this block, the manager had been humbled, clients were captivated, and staff were deeply impressed. The room held a new energy, one of respect and realization. The stage was ready for the elegant resolution, where lessons learned would be cemented, and the final impression of David's quiet authority fully realized. David gave a small, almost imperceptible smile, signaling that the lesson had been delivered. He didn't need to gloat or make a scene. The manager's reaction had done all the work. The room was quiet, charged with the subtle satisfaction of witnessing arrogance humbled by calm authority. David had turned the situation into a masterclass of patience, composure, and quiet power. The manager, still recovering, adjusted his suit nervously, trying to maintain some semblance of dignity. He knew he had misjudged David, and that awareness weighed heavily on him. No amount of forced smiles or polite words could erase the embarrassment he felt. Every client and staff member watching understood the unspoken truth. He had been outplayed. David began gathering his things slowly, careful and deliberate. Each movement was calm, controlled and precise, like a conductor ending a performance. He didn't rush, didn't over-explain, and didn't look back with arrogance. The subtle power he carried was enough. No further proof was necessary. Clients whispered softly among themselves, impressed by the young man's poise and strategy. Staff members exchanged glances of admiration and relief, grateful that the situation had been handled so gracefully. The manager's earlier dominance had crumbled, and respect had quietly replaced it, all without a single shout or dramatics. David paused for a moment by the exit, glancing back at the manager. His eyes held calm authority, but also a hint of kindness, showing that this wasn't about revenge, it was about teaching a lesson. The manager's shoulders slumped slightly, acknowledging the subtle yet undeniable truth. Arrogance and judgment were no match for composure and intelligence. As he walked out, David's movements remained smooth, understated, yet commanding. Every step communicated quiet confidence, a presence that lingered long after he was gone. The manager watched, humbled, understanding that some lessons are better taught without harsh words and harder to forget. Even the clients continued to glance back, some in admiration, some in disbelief. David's subtle cues, calm authority, and composed demeanor had left a lasting impression. His quiet victory had not only reversed the power dynamic, but had elevated respect and awareness throughout the bank. By the end of this block, the resolution was clear. Lessons had been learned, respect had been earned, and the atmosphere had transformed. David had maintained his dignity, taught humility without malice, and left a mark that would be remembered. The manager, staff, and clients had all witnessed the quiet power of intelligence, patience, and composure. David stepped out of the bank calm and composed, feeling the quiet satisfaction of a lesson well taught. The tension that had filled the room earlier had transformed into respect and awareness. Clients and staff alike were still processing what had happened, realizing that appearances could be deceiving and that calm intelligence often spoke louder than arrogance. The manager lingered behind the counter, humbled and thoughtful. His earlier condescension had crumbled, replaced by a deep understanding that judging someone by looks or demeanor could lead to embarrassment and regret. He had witnessed firsthand that patience, composure, and quiet authority were far more powerful than superficial superiority. Outside, David adjusted his backpack and hoodie, blending back into the world as if nothing extraordinary had happened. Yet the subtle confidence he carried and the impression he left would linger in the minds of everyone who had been there. His calm victory had been silent, elegant, and effective, a quiet masterclass in control and dignity. Clients whispered among themselves, sharing glances and comments about the young man who had entered the bank and changed the atmosphere entirely. Even the staff exchanged knowing smiles, acknowledging that they had just witnessed something rare, humility being taught without aggression and authority being claimed without arrogance. David reflected briefly, knowing that the power of composure and observation was often underestimated. Small gestures, subtle confidence, and thoughtful patience could completely shift dynamics and earn respect. No need for loud confrontation, no need for show, just quiet, assured presence and the right timing. As he walked away, he felt the satisfaction of having reversed the balance without creating enemies. The manager had been humbled, but not destroyed. The clients had been engaged, but not intimidated, and the staff had been inspired without feeling belittled. David had left a lasting impression. A lesson in patience, humility, and subtle power. The story of the encounter would linger in the bank for a long time, whispered quietly among those who had seen it. A reminder that first impressions can be deceiving, that arrogance often crumbles in the face of calm intelligence, and that true authority comes from self-control and understanding, not from gestures or words meant to intimidate. By the end, the message was clear. Respect, patience and composure are far more effective than mockery and pride. David had entered the bank as a client, but he had left leaving everyone with something far greater, a lesson that would remain long after he was gone. Calm, confident and composed, he had not only revealed the truth about himself, but also about the power of presence.